Okay, today I have three works from three philosophers that read like poetry. And the reason I have this is because this is my favorite style of philosophy. I think the blending of philosophical principles with like the interpretations of poetry and the applicability of how you can plug it into your life is the most inspirational to me. And I'll share what I like about each work. I'll share some criticisms. Hopefully, I inspire you to, at least start thinking about, reading things that are more expressive. Because I think it's super easy to read something like Meditations. It's super easy to read something like Cicero or something like. I'm trying to think of more literal philosophers, Bertrand Russell, people like that. But I think it's a lot harder to read something that's more expressive. I think it's a lot harder. Actually, Bertrand Russell is a bad example. Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand's a good example. But with that said, we will get into it. The first book I have is The Gay Science by Friedrich Nietzsche. If you know me, you know this is my go-to suggestion when it comes to Nietzsche, and it's really just for the poetry. It's for the aphorisms. It's written in the style of, it first starts out with some songs, it starts out with some poetry, and basically it gets you on the right start of thinking and not thinking literally, thinking and thinking expressively. And I think The Gay Science is Nietzsche at its finest because it's Nietzsche at its most playful. Because when you really think of Nietzsche, what are his ideas? His ideas aren't meant to be sad. They're not meant to be depressive. They're not meant to be nihilistic. I think a lot of people take them as nihilistic, but this is really what Jean-Paul Sartre says, is that he says that, you have the ultimate responsibility. You can live with the fact that nothing has inherent meaning, and it could be depressive or it could be inspiring. You can live with the fact that you are responsible for all of your circumstances, and it could be something that keeps you stuck, or it could be something that lifts you up. And to me, I find this side of Nietzsche so inspiring because he talks about the eternal recurrence. He talks about live your life as if you're meant to repeat it time and time again. Live your life if you're forced to live the exact same existence, you will be happy with it. And I think that's one of the coolest ideas I've ever came across. And I think it's one of the greatest affirmations of life that is not through any sort of deity, that is not through any sort of religion. And you also have the Ubermensch, you also have the idea of God is dead, you also have, all of his ideas when it comes to the will to power. Like all these things are really tied in The Gay Science, and it's done in the most expressive, the most fun way, and it really is Nietzsche at his finest. The next thing I have is the Essential Schopenhauer. This is key selections from the world as will and representations in other writings. I really need to read more Schopenhauer because I do like him. There's parts of this book that people will not like, I'm telling you already. But the overall message of this book is super interesting because it hinges on two key ideas. First, the Platonic versus Aristotelian idea of forms, which basically is things are as they seem to be, which is the Aristotelian, or things are more than we can ever perceive, which is the Platonic. And Schopenhauer basically believes that it's the Platonic form. The greatest example of this is everything you see right now, every color you see is really just atoms vibrating at a certain frequency to give the appearance of color. And, everything that we think we see is really just colorless atoms. But basically, this goes into our own biases. This goes into how we view the world and how the world is shaped. And the other facet of the book is the will to live, which basically Schopenhauer says, why do humans make decisions that are out of our own best interest? Why do we use stupid things? Why do we posture? Why do we go to war? Why do we do any of these things? And it's basically what Schopenhauer calls the force of the will to live, which is basically your own self-preservation at the expense of your own self-interest and the dumbness and the pitfalls of man. And, Schopenhauer doesn't quite write in the style of aphorism. He doesn't write in the style of poetry, but his ideas are very mystical in the sense that it's not something you would expect from a common philosopher. It's not something that you expect. And I really need to read more Schopenhauer because I know he writes certain books in aphoristic styles, and I love aphorism. I think they're the coolest way to absorb information. So, stay on the lookout for me reviewing those books, those works. But overall, I think this is a super interesting book, and I think Schopenhauer is something that you really should pick up if you like Nietzsche because very similar. I think they're really congruent on a lot of their beliefs. I just think they're both too stubborn to realize that they're saying exactly the same thing. But it's like when you're talking to someone and You're trying to get across to them that we agree. You just disagree semantically, and it's just like they don't understand it. I think this is really the disconnect between Nietzsche and Schopenhauer. But basically, two birds of a feather. But the next person we have is somebody that Nietzsche described himself as brothers of the soul. This is Emerson. Emerson is quite possibly the most interesting philosopher because he is one of the only men who can capture an entire book's worth of information in 10 pages. Emerson's greatest work, Self-Reliance, is about 14 pages long, at least it is in this copy. He splices in poems, he adds quotes from great individuals. He really does it all. And to me, Emerson is the quintessential example of a philosopher that blurs the line between poetry, between mysticism and philosophy. And I think if you've never read anything by Emerson, what I really want you to do is you don't have to go out and buy this book. Literally just go online right now, go find Self-Reliance, just look it up. I'm sure it's online for free somewhere. Emerson, he was alive during the Civil War, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, he was alive during the Civil War. I think he died in 1872, something like that. So basically, you can find it. You can find it online. You can find it for free. You can go read it, and you can be extremely inspired. Self-Reliance to this day is one of the greatest things I've ever read, and I really think you should read it. To summarize the entire essay, basically is the greatest achievement in the world is being yourself. The greatest achievement is to be exactly who you're meant to be and to resist the herd mentality, because that's all we can do in life. The thing that we have that no one else has is ourselves. Yet we are so willing to give it away. We're so willing to, subject ourselves to what everyone else wants and never ask what we want. And because we never ask what we want, we can never be happy. And that's really the summation of these ideas. But, here are three philosophers that read to me like poets. I'm sure there's more. I know I could have included the Gita. I know I could have included Lao Tzu with the Tao Te Ching. But, these are just the three that were off the top of my head. And I think they're pretty well-known philosophers. But if you've never read them, they're definitely worth a shot. They're not like most philosophers. To tell you the truth, I can't read most philosophy. I find it too boring. I find it too repetitive. I will never pick up the Jean-Paul Sartre book that's like this big. I really don't want to pick up Kierkegaard. I know he says some interesting things, but you don't need 2,000 pages to write something insightful. You can do it in a handful of aphorisms. You can do it in a handful of pages. And I think that's the real block for people reading philosophy, is that it seems so dense. So I think if you want to start somewhere when it comes to philosophy, start with the authors that can say less with more. Start with the authors that encapsulate most of their beliefs in a handful of paragraphs. And I think the three I shared with you, very, very good examples of that. I don't want people to be turned off by philosophies like high and mightiness. So yeah, with that said, I love you guys so much. Thank you guys so much. If you want to read my writings, go ahead, join my school community. If you don't want to do that, consider sticking around the channel. Peace out. Love you guys so much.